Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the latest on the government's plans to cut the number of civil servants by a fifth. Boris Johnson insisted that this would not affect frontline services, just efficiency savings. Now, I don't know how ignorant you need to be to have believed that, but a report in the Financial Times has revealed that the review into the proposal, which was kept very quiet, unsurprisingly, conducted by one of Boris Johnson's allies as well, found that frontline services would be hit pretty hard. Who'd have thought it? But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So this notion of Whitehall waste has been doing the rounds, I think, for decades. I remember watching Yes Minister as a lad in the 1980s, which frequently poked fun at the idea of a government minister trying to reduce the size of the civil service and cut out waste, when all that usually ended up happening was that it grew larger. And in reality, the whole concept is a nonsense. When a civil servant is employed, just like anybody else, they're employed to do a particular job. You know, while that work needs doing, you need that civil servant to do it. The idea that there are civil servants just sitting around doing nothing is ludicrous. You could probably argue that there's some bloat inside 10 Downing Street. You know, when we look at what happened during the pandemic, if they had time to socialise with wine and cheese all the time, not as one-offs, you could probably argue that maybe efficiency savings were possible there. But I don't think that's the staff they're talking about. There are certainly not 91,000 people stuffing themselves with party nibbles in number 10. So if you make a civil servant redundant, you are doing without the work that they were carrying out. Jacob Rees-Mogg tried to say a few months ago that many of these civil servants were taken on to deal with Brexit and were no longer needed. Now, it is certainly true that the government indeed hired a load of extra civil servants to deal with Brexit, but it is very far from true that they are no longer needed. Brexit is still a thing, and so those civil servants are still needed. In fact, it's not even like Brexit's getting any better and they're managing it better. It's getting worse every year. So we need way more. You know, we don't have the officials needed to manage our border controls, for example. Nowhere near enough. Brexiteers who go on about borders all the time, they don't seem to mind that we're failing to control ours with customs officials waving almost everything through and virtually no standards controls at all. But beyond the border, there is extra work for almost every government department. The Department for Trade needs more staff to try and work on trade deals. The Department for Health and Social Care needs more staff to try and secure staff, equipment and medicines. All of these are made more difficult by Brexit and so require more civil servants to manage, not fewer. The Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, they need more staff to help struggling businesses cope with the minefield of a hard Brexit and to implement net zero. Good joke. I know the Tories aren't actually implementing net zero, but they claim they are. DEFRA needs more staff to try and save the farming industry from the ravages of both Brexit and our wholly inadvised post-Brexit trade deals with Australia, New Zealand and others. The Department for Levelling Up needs more staff to, well, do something, because all they're doing at the moment is levelling down. The Department for Work and Pensions, that's going to need more staff because unemployment's forecast to go up a lot. And yet that's going to be slated for it's one of the biggest staff reductions, I think. The Ministry of Defence, that's going to need more staff to adapt to a future that could include a much more serious war than is already happening in Ukraine. Could go on. Wherever you try and cut civil servants, you will hit important services, frontline services. And the review held by Steve Barclay, this is a Boris Johnson loyalist. This is not, you know, Rishi Sunak or someone like that was trying to undermine him. No, this is Steve Barclay. Found exactly this. That it was going to hit frontline services, that there was no way to manage it without doing that. And it's reported that this review caused the Treasury to lose enthusiasm for the plan. But now there is to be a new Prime Minister. It is likely to be Liz Truss, and she is likely to appoint a certifiable lunatic to the role of Chancellor. Truss is also talking about a war on Whitehall waste as she gets behind this plan to gut the civil service. The review seemed to make clear that it would cost jobs outside of London as well. I mean, yeah, it's all very well Truss talking about Whitehall, but there's no scope for cutting 91,000 jobs there. This is a little bit like when Truss reckoned she could cut the civil service and make savings that exceeded the total wage bill of every civil servant in the country. Oh, we're just going to make these savings by cutting the number of civil servants. The savings you claim to be able to make is more than the wage bill of every civil servant in the country. So that means you're going to cut doctors, nurses and so on. Oh, no, 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 no. All right, then how does that work then? Oh, I'm just going to scrap the plan because you've misunderstood it. It's a similar thing here. There are just over 100,000 civil servants in London, the whole of London. It would be ludicrous to suggest you're going to leave the capital with just 10% of its civil servants left in post. Are you going to axe the civil service in London by 90% a year? No, you're not. So, of course, this is going to mean job losses around the country. It'll mean job losses in the Red Wall as well. The parts of the country the Tories claim to be levelling up. We've already had the video of Rishi Sunak admitting that he actively worked to level down these areas. Now Liz Truss plans to do the same. And the thing about these areas is cuts to frontline services will be noticed immediately. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if these plans don't see fruition quite yet, that they wait until after the next election to try and disguise it. Because when you remove public services from an area, you hurt that area economically. Remember, public services aren't about making people happy as such. It's not just a moral imperative. They're about letting people be productive. It's very practical. Transport, healthcare, education, policing, and more besides. All this infrastructure is about giving people the means to maximise their productivity. Better transport means they've got a wider area that they can find work in, so find a job that would suit them better. Better education gives them more skills, so it's more benefit. We're struggling for skills at the moment, for skilled workers. Healthcare gets them back on their feet when they're ill, back to maximum productivity earlier. You know, if the jobs are lost directly from Brexit management as well, then you'll also make an already chaotic system even more so. Like, imagine having fewer staff dealing with imports and exports. I mean, that's already a mess. What's that going to do to the government's fantasy plans for growth? And then you think about what's to come. So this is all now, like, we can't afford to cut the civil service now. But then you think, what about the future? Assuming the government carry on for the full 5 years, and they've got the majority to, should they choose, that's fine. Consider what they've got coming. Liz Truss says she wants to plot a course of action which leads to an inevitable trade war with the EU, as well as diplomatic argy-bargy with both the United States and China. Oh, nice one. Let's make enemies of every superpower in the world, why don't we? All at the same time, why not get it all out of the way? Global Britain, yay. How will the government manage that with a skeleton civil service? The Tories try and claim that they're only going back to the size of the service as it was towards the end of Cameron's time in office. It's like, oh, we're only going back to then. It's like, but it was shit back then. Our public services were failing badly. The government kept lowering the bar for various targets, like waiting times in A&E and things like that, for example. They kept missing them, so they kept lowering the bar. And then they still failed to meet them, so they just ended up scrapping a lot of the targets altogether. It wasn't a good model back then. It was terrible. And why was it terrible? Because they were gutting public services. The NHS, the police force, prisons, courts. Massive reductions to investment, which has led to the shit show we have now, where the NHS is going into meltdown in summer, never mind the horrors of what's to come this winter. Not enough police, massive backlogs in our court system, which predate COVID, prisons which already can't cope, and the government's plan is to reduce the size of the workforce in all of these areas still further by 20%. And they're trying to convince you that cutting staff by 20% in departments which are already struggling won't make things worse? On what basis? That things are so bad they couldn't get worse? Can always get worse. As people are going to discover when Liz Truss gets her feet under the table. And what are the gammons going to think when she cuts the size of our border force? I know Truss has been saying that she's going to insist that France control our border for us, but this is the same energy with which the orange one promised that Mexico would pay for his white elephant wall. How did that go? Can you imagine Liz Truss saying, look, we want to cut the size of our civil service, right? We want to cut our border force because we can't be asked to pay for it. So you need to put more staff and do our job for us. Can you imagine what Macron would say to that? No, the likes of Farage, they're going to carry on shouting at the sea. And against that background, Liz Truss is going to announce a cut in our border force. Is that it? How's that going to go down? This is delusional politics of the highest order. It used to be the case that the Tories would blame all sorts of spurious things for their own failure to govern. Oh, they'd blame civil service waste, absolutely, immigration, the EU, you name it. But they were self-aware. They knew that they were just blaming and not actually doing anything. They knew that there was no appreciable civil service waste. They were the ones who employed them. They knew that we needed more immigration. That's why our immigration rules were much looser than EU rules required. Unbeknownst to the people who voted leave, they thought, oh, immigration rules are too loose in the EU. No, our immigration rules were loose. EU ones are not. You know, and the Tories helped drive the very formation of the EU. But then along came David Cameron, who didn't understand that the blame was just a game, a distraction, not actually real. And now here we are, getting ready to award Boris Johnson with the worst Prime Minister in history award, but telling him not to get used to it because he'll probably have to pass it on in a few months. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.